All right, thank you. Great to be here. Well, we're going to talk about igniting your people data. We're going to talk about using all of that HR data that you have access to help the business make better decisions. Now, as HR leaders, I think we have a mandate to be data-driven. But we're like, what does that mean, right? And what does that pathway look like? How do we get there? And how do we know when we've gotten there, all right? I think these are very fair questions to ask of ourselves. And sometimes it can feel like we have a lot of pressure on us to be data-driven. So what we're going to talk about today is that pathway. It's about how we make progress. Now, the actual path is not a straight line. It's probably something that looks a little bit more curved, probably has some obstacles in the way. We have to navigate some switchbacks and keep focus on that end goal there at the end of the arrow. And I also appreciate that everybody is perhaps at a different point in that pathway in your journey at your organization. Some of the path you control as an HR leader, as an HR professional. Other parts of the path are beyond your control. It's the organization that you work within. It's maybe the nature of the data that you're dealing with and the nature of your business, if you will. So what we're going to talk about is saying, hey, it's easy to say we need to be data-driven, but when we work to put that in action, we soon discover that there's much more to it. And we're going to talk about some practical ways that we can grab some data, help the business get some clarity on business outcomes and how HR issues are impacting them. So, as I was already introduced, my background is both as a practitioner, somebody who did organizational research and who was on the hook to help the business make decisions about different programs and projects. Also help HR make decisions about selection systems or the role of employee engagement on outcomes of interest. But I also, in my current role today as a solutions architect at One Model, speak with a lot of people analytics teams who are at different places on that journey, on that pathway. And they're coming to us because they want help getting to the end of that pathway. They want to be more impactful for the business. And so we're going to talk about, again, what we can do in a practical way to become more data-driven. Now, it's not something that I think is fair to say we can solve in 50 minutes. That's unreasonable, right? We have to be realistic about how fast we can move. The other thing is that our organization can only tolerate so much change, even if it's change for the better, but they can only handle so much so fast. There's no single approach that's going to work for every organization. There are lots of variables in play, but we have to make an effort to move down that pathway. And I think the world is starting to speed up. I don't know about you, but when I think about what AI is doing to us, right, and how quickly that technology is evolving, and it's not something that's necessarily easy to understand, but I know we can leverage it, and we can leverage it to our benefit, and that's what we want to do. So I'm going to share my insights for what they're worth as somebody who's been there, done that, and also somebody who talks a lot with people analytics teams about their journey. Now, this might be what the journey looks like or feels like. It's like, oh my goodness. Are we ever going to get to where we need to go? Now, don't let that be intimidating. I think it's just a journey of one step at a time, and it's keeping our eyes on the prize. Where do we ultimately want to be? And that is, I think we add the most value as an HR function when we help the business make better decisions. My hope is, regardless of where you are in your journey today, you will pick up something, maybe a little nugget, maybe a little bit a different way of thinking that you can take back to your organization next week and think maybe a little bit differently, or actually do something a little bit different that will, again, keep you moving along that pathway. So to do this, we're going to talk about a framework. And it's a pretty simple framework. It's 3 pillars, if you will. Identify, overcome, and leverage. We're going to keep it pretty simple. And one of the themes that you'll hear pop out is small, quick wins. Because we can keep it manageable, we can keep things moving, we can learn quickly, we can demonstrate value quickly. So let's talk about identify. The first thing is we want to identify those high impact business problems. Because if we solve or work on or move towards providing insights about high impact business problems, we're going to get attention, we're going to get support, we're going to get momentum going, okay? Second is that we're going to overcome any fear and skepticism that we might have or some of the folks around us might have. And it can be daunting to think about, wow, how do I get data? How do I use data to actually tell the business something that they don't already know? And that was something that I was always afraid of. Wow, how am I going to do this? How am I going to make the case? And we're going to talk about some techniques to overcome that and to keep moving forward, right? Finally, leverage. We're going to talk about using AI as an extension of ourselves, not as a replacement for what we bring, but as an extension, allowing us to do more faster. So we're going to dive into the first part of our playbook, which was identify. And I want to start with what might be the most controversial thing I'll say all day. I'll say it again. So I've said it twice, stop looking at HR data. And I know that's maybe a little bit odd, a little bit interesting if you're being polite. This fella's up here talking about people analytics, right? How we take HR data and drive business outcomes. And then he says, well, don't look at HR data. What does he mean by that? And I'll clarify a little bit. Maybe we've been thinking about our HR data in a little bit of a wrong way. Maybe we've been leveraging it incorrectly. What I would like to recommend is that we think about the business issue first. If we're trying to add value for the business, let's think about the things that the business cares about. You might say, well, how's that going to work? We're really good with our HR data. Maybe we can do lots of reports. We can talk about headcount turnover over time. We can talk about engagement of employees and all those sorts of things. And the question that I would pose to you is, okay, and if you're a business leader, the and part is, and how does that impact my outcomes? How does that relate to something that I care about? Impact starts with the business. So let's start with business data. Let's start by identifying those outcomes that the business cares about. And analytics that link HR, policies, processes, people to business outcomes is going to get attention, and it's going to get support, and it's going to get enthusiasm out of the business. And they're going to say, wow, this is great, I want more. And that's the best problem you can have, is the business saying, I want more from you, telling me how all this HR stuff that you folks are doing is impacting what we care about on the business side. Now let's think about it. The business leaders care about business outcomes. They care about driving results. And one of the things that I would present to you for consideration is, it's hard to get good business results if you have people problems. And somewhere in getting business results over here, there were people involved, right? That's why we talk about like human capital. It's our most important asset as an organization. It's people that make the difference. It's people that produce those outcomes. So guess what? It's probably a fair bet that if you're not getting the business outcomes that you want or you care about, there's something along the way with people that explains why you're not getting those outcomes. Maybe we don't have the right process or policy or the right mix of talent. Maybe there's something going on that we can figure out, that we can adjust as an HR organization and help the business drive home value. So to prove that point, I want to do a little bit of a quick exercise. Now, I want you to forget about your typical HR metrics, And I want you to engage with each other at the table. Hopefully there's somebody there that you've just met, don't know, hopefully from a different organization. And I want you to share some information about yourself, your name, what your role is, where you work. And I want you to share what you think your organization is struggling with. What is the business outcome, or 2 or 3, that you think your business is struggling to drive in the right direction? So let's take some time and identify some possible business outcome issues. Take about 5 minutes. Let's get started. Hopefully that was a great opportunity to maybe learn something, ideate, get some ideas on what other folks, their organizations are struggling with. Anyone want to throw out maybe some issues or ideas real quick of what came up in your conversations? Just brief one-liners. Competition. Election cycle. Okay. Skills and capabilities. Growth. Excellent. Managing change. All right. Excellent. So the point is that everybody's organization, I think, is struggling with something, right? And what is it at your organization ultimately, right? How do you know when you go back next week that you've zoomed in on the right issue? And to do that, I'm going to propose to us that we need to become business detectives. We need to get a bit more in tune potentially. Now, everybody's a little bit different where they're at, but we need to get in tune with what our business is struggling with. And we might say, well, how are we going to do that? How do I get in tune with what the business is dealing with? And I have 2 suggestions that I want to throw out there as possibilities. And you might be doing one or both of these, and if so, that's great. The first is make a friend on the business side. So somebody who's at your level, a peer of yours, maybe they're in finance or they're in operations or they're in sales or something of that nature, and just ask them out for coffee and start up that relationship, start that conversation and share with each other what you're working on, what you're doing, and then ask the person from your vantage point, what is your group struggling with? What are the issues that you're facing? And drive the conversation towards figuring out where in that chain of getting business results the people fall, right? Where is it that maybe there's an opportunity for HR insights to help the business make better decisions? Just getting our heads around how the business works, I think, is a super great way to make us more effective as business partners. Now, the second thing that I'm going to recommend, and maybe you've thought about this, maybe you've done it, maybe not, is look at what already has been written. And in the form of, like, your company's annual report. Your company might publish publicly an annual report if it's publicly traded, or it might internally publish an annual report. Usually it's the C-suite or the CEO saying, here's what we did last year, here are the issues that we faced, here's what we're doing to correct those issues, here's what we're looking forward to in the future, and so forth. That's a great way to identify what the leadership team at your organization themselves see as key business outcomes of interest. Now, I want to lean into that a little bit, and I want to propose using AI to do this work for us. And so I wrote a prompt that went into Gemini and said, I want you to download the annual report for Qantas Airlines. And I have no affiliation with Qantas other than I flew over on that airline. It was awesome. But I said, go grab the annual report, and I want you to summarize it for me. I want you to tell me what they're talking about in terms of business outcomes, and I want you to identify what people issues were referenced in the report. And then I did another prompt that said, okay, I'm a human resources analyst. I want ideas on what I can research that would link to those business outcomes. And I threw it into Gemini, and I just have a brief video showing what Gemini was doing, and it really did this quite quickly. It went out, it found the report. I was like, wow, and it summarized it for me in easy to read terms. And it did identify business issues that were mentioned in the report and some of the HR issues that Qantas was dealing with and what they were doing to make improvements. And then I put in that second prompt about, okay, give me help, give me some ideas on what I can analyze. How can I make an impact here? And it actually came up with like 7 really good ideas. And it said, here's the data that you need to collect. Here's what you're trying to figure out. Here's what I think you're going to need to do in order to make this work properly. And just to kind of short circuit it a little bit, one of the ideas it came up with was, you know, they talked about on-time performance. They talked about cancellations. And I think you might find that if there are hotspots in terms of absenteeism or sick leave, that might explain some of the performance challenges that they're having. And here's what you would do from a research perspective, why it's useful. Here's the data that you need to go gather. And I thought, wow, that was a great way to address a couple of issues in one simple step. Number one, identify what the business cares about. And then number two, get ideas on what kind of quick analysis I could do to see if there's a relationship there. And a lot of times when it comes to doing organizational research, there's a value or a benefit to doing directionally correct, high-level research just to see if there's something there, and we can always dive in deeper. You don't have to solve every problem at once, right? So we need to build momentum. We need to get the business trusting us, wanting more from us. So how do we do that? Well, we're probably going to have to overcome some of our fears, some of our concerns. Maybe that's not an issue for you, and if so, great. You get to go right into the leverage portion of the presentation. But from an overcome perspective, we want to embrace good failures. One of the fears that you might have is fear of failure. It's okay to fail if we learn from it. And I think also, I want to throw something out that maybe you're a little bit concerned about in terms, and it's keeping you from maybe trying, or you think it's going to complicate things for you, and that is, what if I look for a relationship and I don't find it? Or what if I find something that maybe is a little bit controversial or leadership doesn't want to hear? And one of the things that I would tell my team is, we're not responsible for the outcomes. We are responsible as HR practitioners for understanding what we're doing on the HR side, for pulling information together in an honest fashion, looking at it, being open-minded, and interpreting the data for what it is. We're not responsible for uncovering or owning, like if we uncover an uncomfortable relationship between variables. Like maybe that training program didn't improve performance as much as we thought. That's an outcome that comes about from the research that we do. We own doing good research. We own being honest brokers with information. We don't own those outcomes that might be a little bit uncomfortable. So that was one of the things that I had to navigate often with my teams. The other thing that you might be afraid of is being told no. You might be afraid of leadership saying, we don't need that, or we don't want that, or something of that nature. The strategy that I use to overcome that, aside from just not asking for permission, is to keep things small, to keep the level of effort low and reasonable, to keep it so that if we're not asking for $100,000 to do a survey, instead we can use data that we already have as an example, then who's going to say no, right? If we keep the ask small, if we keep the disruption small, we're more likely to be able to do it, get it done, see what happens, as opposed to having to negotiate all sorts of pathways in order to be able to do the research that we want. If we can keep a low profile, low risk, low resources, we're much more likely to be able to move forward and do what we want to do. Now, the small win is our antidote. That's how we're going to overcome those fears. It's how we're going to build momentum. We don't, like I said, don't have to do everything at once. We start by asking a smart question. We start by thinking about again, that linkage between something in human resources with an outcome that the business cares about. If we do research on things that the business doesn't care about, we're just not going to get their interest and we're not going to get their support. So we need to keep a focus on what the business cares about. The next thing that we have to do is gather data. And quite honestly, this can be a very challenging part of the process. But what I'm going to walk us through in terms of a vignette is the notion of grabbing data that we already have. Chances are your organization, your HR team is already putting out a quarterly or monthly report. Chances are there's already some sort of metrics on the business side that finance is publishing or everybody agrees to. Now, we're going to gather data at a fairly high level, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But the idea is if we can work with data that already exists and everybody agrees on, then we're that much further ahead in terms of keeping things small, fast moving, getting value quickly. Because there's nothing worse than getting into a big argument over data and what it means and people don't like it and what so forth. We're then going to use that data to answer the question. We're going to frame a testable question in an open and honest fashion, right? We'll talk a little bit about that. Like an honest question is there a relationship between employee engagement and customer satisfaction? That's a fair question. What I often was asked to do when I was an organizational researcher is somebody would come up and say, I want you to prove that engagement drives customer satisfaction. That's kind of a loaded question. We want to ask an honest question and answer it in an honest way. We just want to be honest brokers of the information. It's just going to build up more credibility for us with the business if we do it that way. Once we get our answers, we can drive the conversation with the business. We can review the results with them and say, what do you think? What is this telling us? Does this make sense? How do you think we might use this? And it might open up a whole line of conversations to come with regard to what HR can do differently to drive results for the business. Again, we want to avoid that trap of trying to prove something. When we get into looking at data, we just want to be open-minded about what's going on. We just want to be honest brokers of information. We don't want to get into the politics of trying to support a particular program or something like that. This is how we get our small wins. And I would rather get many small wins than one big win. Because if we can get small wins going with the business, they're going to keep asking for more and more. And by the way, we have to get good at doing analytics quickly. If a question or issue comes up and it takes us 3 months to address that question, the issue becomes stale. And one of the things that I learned about supporting the business is they are going to make decisions about what they're going to do, whether or not I show up to the table with data. So I would rather show up to the table with something than nothing and be a part of that decision-making process. HR is surrounded by AI. This is our leverage portion of the playbook. We have AI all around us. You've probably noticed. And maybe even your leadership is nudging you to do more with AI. AI is a great extension of you. It does not replace you. And I know there might be some concerns among teams about, oh, AI is going to take our job, or we're going to replace us. No, we're always in control. We use AI intelligently, smartly, to do more faster, right? It's not going to replace us. Go in with that in mind. How do I use AI to keep this cycle moving quickly and getting value? Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about, just real quickly, some of the concerns we might have with using AI. Number one is your organization might have policies that say, hey, you're not allowed to use AI at all, or this is what you're allowed to load into AI, and this is what you're not allowed to do, and so forth. We always want to respect those because they're there to protect us and the organization. There might also be some ethical concerns that you would have. It just depends on how you're using AI. If you're using AI to gather information and summarize facts, that's one thing, and it's typically pretty safe. if you're using it to make decisions about people, that could be prove to be an ethical quandary of sorts. And then finally, whenever we use AI to do something, we want to make sure that we can explain what it did, why it did it, and why it makes sense. My rule for my team was always, we will never present data that we can't explain how we got there. So we always need to be transparent, and that includes understanding what our AI tool is doing. Now, I want to walk through, as we go into kind of this leverage element of the presentation, a bit of a vignette. What do we measure? Now, you folks talked about some of the business challenges that you had, and you might have some theories about, from an HR perspective, what is related to those challenges or what's driving it. I want to come at this from a perspective of, let's say that I work for a big box retailer, and I make a friend in the business, and she says, you know, Steve, we're really struggling with some stores having really low customer satisfaction. And I said, well, what do you think is causing that? And she goes, well, we think it might be low engagement. We think it might be absenteeism or staffing levels or something like that. And so we come up with, again, what we think the important business outcome is, and we identify some HR issues that might be related. So when I start laying this out on paper, I go, okay, I've got customer satisfaction. That's what I'm trying to figure out. And I can probably find customer review scores that the business is already using. Okay, great. Everybody has agreed on that. Then I start thinking about some of those HR issues, right? Store turnover, dissatisfaction, poorly trained employees, understaffing. And I go, I wonder if there's any data that I can grab that relates to those things. And I realize, oh, I have engagement scores, I have annual termination rate data, staffing levels, training compliance. All of that stuff is probably on a monthly scorecard somewhere already. So I've framed out in my mind, here's what I'm trying to go after. Here are some of the things that I think are related, driving customer satisfaction, and here's some data that I can go grab to address the issue. So I've got a smart question, right? Which is, how does turnover, engagement, training, and staffing impact customer satisfaction? I've identified the business issue by talking with my friend in the business. Now I'm going to translate this into something really tactical, tangible. I go out, I define the different metrics that I have, and by the way, they already exist. They're in the monthly scorecard. And I create, at the bottom right here, you see a fairly simple Excel file, right? One row per store, and I'm just gathering up their customer review score for the year, their annual turnover rate, their employee engagement score, all those sorts of things. Again, things that are probably already being captured and presented somewhere. Now, what am I going to do with this Excel file? Am I going to spend 2 days looking at it, creating graphs, visualizations? Well, we're in that leverage phase of our conversation. I'm actually going to let AI take a stab at it. Now, not only am I going to use AI to look at it, I'm going to use AI to write the prompt to look at it. So I got into Gemini and I said, Gemini, I have this data set. Here's what's in the data set. And I've got one row per store. And I have some questions. I want to know how these HR things might explain customer satisfaction. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to write me a prompt. And in that prompt, I want to make sure that we do a detailed analysis for each, to answer each question. I need a non-technical summary because I'm going to present this to non-technical people. Give me some graphs and some charts, and I'm going to create a deck. And so I put that into Gemini, and it actually runs through. And by the way, use any platform that you prefer. Copilot will do this, ChatGPT will do this, etc. And it wrote a really good prompt. And I'm a researcher by training, and I'm like, wow, okay, that's really good. And it explained it to me, right? It made it simple. It's not like you have to be a data scientist. You do not have to be an analyst. You do not have to be a researcher to do this and do this well. So it goes through and it writes this long prompt for me. I copy the prompt, I paste it back in, and I attach my Excel file, which it allows me to do, and I say, go to town, do the analysis for me. And what you're going to see is it going through, looking at the data, and it actually starts creating visualizations for me. And it starts explaining what's going on. And it says, oh, Steve, engagement score is your most important factor. And it dives into it a little bit deeper, and it says, oh, here's some scatter plots you might find interesting. Here are the relationships that's going on. I asked for a correlation matrix because I'm geeky that way, and it made one for me. If you don't want to see that, you don't have to ask for it. And then it summarized what it found in the data so that I can kind of do a double check, a sanity check of the data, so to speak. And it then broke it apart and said, when I think about these four things working together, here's how they all work to explain customer satisfaction. Now, what I found really cool about the analysis is it came out and it said something really practical. It says, look, you ought to have three priorities. Drive engagement. Now, what's interesting is it says, if you move engagement 1 point, I would expect the customer review score to increase by 3.3 points. Now, that's a specific piece of data that your business can drive decisions around. You've now become data-driven because you have the receipts. You've gone in and you've said, we think that if we do this, we'll get that. Is it a guarantee? No, of course not. But we're putting tangible markers down there. We're prescribing very specific action. Now, reasonable people can talk about how we're going to improve engagement, or we might decide that it's more important to go after employee retention than engagement. We won't get as much of a move by 1 point in employee retention, but maybe that's what we want to do instead. We can drive that conversation. We can engage the business in the conversation, and we can talk about what HR can do to drive these three priorities. Because, by the way, all of these are HR-related priorities. Now, words of caution, right? Is it that easy? Is it that simple? Well, it kind of is, and it kind of isn't. But one of the things that I thought about, or some of the things I thought about as I was going through this, is number one, and I want to reinforce this, bots will not do people analytics better than you. You can't just throw all the data to a bot and expect it to come out with something good at the end. You're always in control. You have to be the one driving things. There's really no easy button, so to speak. Bots won't tell you when they don't understand what you're asking for. They'll just go and do it, and they won't ask for clarification. We need to trust but verify the analyses that bots give us. So you have to make sure that the common sense filter has been applied and you look things over. So again, just some words of caution. And some of the other learnings from my experience is, again, the AI can't replace you and your experience and your expertise when it comes to HR. Leverage the AI to extend yourself and do some of the hard analytics for you. I took a very practical, real-world approach to this. I fabricated the data. But the reality is, if somebody came back and said, hey, I want to do a deeper dive, I wouldn't be able to do it. Why? Because I was going after that quick win, a directionally correct finding to build up rapport with the business. This is where you need a platform and a strategy. If you're going to do this at scale and you're going to get into the details, this is where you have to have a platform where all of your data is coming together, getting cleaned, being made available to you at a more granular level, and it has to be AI ready. You can't point a bot to your Workday instance and expect to get good analytics. This is where a platform like One Model comes into play. Because all of that data is together, you can point AI to it, get the analyses done that you want to get done. So let's recap quickly what we've talked about. We have a platform, identify key business issues, overcome fear and skepticism through quick wins, keep things moving quickly, leverage AI to do work at scale for us very quickly. We talked about a playbook. A playbook is only good if you run plays from the playbook. We showed that pathway to becoming data-driven. You're somewhere on that pathway. You might be at the start, you might be at the end. What is the one thing that you're going to do next week to start leveraging your data to explain business outcomes of interest and add value to the business? That's my challenge to you, wherever you are on that continuum. Find something that you can do, try things a little bit differently, keep moving down that pathway. Thank you so much. If you want to continue the conversation, I'll be downstairs at the One Model booth. Would love to talk to you more about what your organization is struggling with and what you're doing, what you're thinking of doing. Thank you.